Hey, everybody, this is Kenny. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. This is a podcast for middle managers who want to develop themselves, develop their teams, and improve their results. I got the opportunity to talk to author, speaker, coach, mentor, but the C-suite leadership guy, Tom Kereszti, joined me today, and Tom has so much experience and knowledge to share. Listen in as he talks about his stories of growing through failure, the 4 keys to leadership success, what does it really mean to be a servant leader, and how leadership has changed through the years. He gives some great advice for all you leaders out there. You don't want to miss a second. Let's get at it.
This episode is brought to you by Kitcaster. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. How do funded startup founders attract prospects and talent? Podcast interviews. How do entrepreneurs with exits find new deals? Podcast interviews. How do C-suite execs differentiate in crowded markets? Podcast interviews. Kitcaster books you on top podcasts. Click the link in the show notes for a special offer. Celebrate good conversation.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of the Leading from the Middle podcast. I have just a tremendous guest today, and talking to him for a couple of minutes before, we have a lot in common, except, man, he's a leadership expert. He's not going to say that. I'm saying that. So without further ado, I want to introduce C-suite leadership guy, Tom Kereszti. And, Tom is also an author. He's a speaker. He's a coach. He's a mentor. He really lives and breathes leadership every day, and he's so helpful to others. So Tom, it is so great to have you on. How you doing, sir?
Kenny, thanks for having me. Thanks for that grandiose introduction. And as I say many times, the introduction doesn't matter if you bomb during the podcast. so I'm just I'll try to do my best, add some value to the audience, and be their friend.
Oh, I know you will. And so thank you so much. So I'm going to jump right in. I really would love to hear your backstory, because it leads to sort of, to me, the core of a lot of what you do, where you talk about how some of the failures that you've had really led to a lot of success. So I want to hear your backstory and what led you to do what you're doing now.
Life, it's life is a series of doors that open and close. And for all you listeners who I think you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that your listeners are middle-level managers. So yes. Here's the good news for all the middle-level managers. You can't get to C-suite without going through middle-level management, right? Yeah. So you can't get to the top unless you go through the middle. And, as you go through the middle, there's, also different levels of the middle. I went through a number of different levels of the middle before I became a C-suite executive and then finally CEO. But, just be ready when the doors open. I was ready when the doors opened, and sometimes doors shut, and those are setbacks. Today I don't think anybody gets fired. Everybody moves on to bigger and better opportunities, but the fact is they got fired, right? Right. And that's okay. It's perfectly okay to get fired. It's not the end of the world. It allows you to kind of just take some time out, reassess your gifts, reassess what your talent is, what you want to do, and then go into full speed. Don't sit on the sideline too long, but go into full speed, looking for your next opportunity. And within a short period of time, you'll find it. And most of the time, it works out better. You're happier at the new place than you were at the last place. And that's probably the reason you're not at the last place, because you either didn't like it or they didn't like you, or something went wrong, right? And that's why you severed that relationship. So, I call life a sine wave. You go through the peaks and the valleys and the peaks and the valleys. And that's the same thing with your career. You go through your peaks and the valleys, and sometimes things are firing at all cylinders and things are great, and sometimes they're not. So just embrace the opportunities, learn from the opportunities. I say all the time, look, if you're not learning from your experiences, it's just stuff that happens to you, right? If something happens, then just kind of sit back. Don't panic, relax, assess, see what happens, and see how you can better yourself. For example, for me, right, I had throughout my career, I was always on I would say a corporate ladder. I was climbing always a ladder. And in many times earlier in my career, I had a problem with authority. Many times I got into a situation where I was working for somebody And I would be scratching my head like, why the heck am I working for this guy? It should be the other way around, right? This guy is, I don't get it. Why is he in that position and why am I not? It's not fair. And I would rebel, right? And then after a couple of, iterations of that, I just realized, look, if I just focus on myself, do the right thing, it's only a function of time, maybe 2-3 years before I'll get promoted from underneath that guy anyway. And in fact, in my life, I had probably about 3 or 4 bosses who are highly respected, brilliant individuals, great people skills. I'd love working for them. I go through a wall for them. Mm-hmm. And there was, probably a half dozen individuals where I said, well, I just don't get it. Why are they, why am I working for them? It should be the other way around. Right. And then early on in my career, I rebelled, and then I learned that's not going to get me anywhere. What's going to get me is my own circle of influence, work on that, be better, shine like a light. And then before you know it, I get promoted out from underneath that guy or that woman, and I'll be fine.
Wow. Wow. I love that. Some great advice there. So tell us a story or two of when you were in one of those valleys.
So the first time I got canned was after 15 years for a Fortune 500 company. And that was one of those instances where I didn't rebel that much, but I had a difficulty accepting that I was working for somebody. First of all, when I got sent out to one of my first expat assignments to start up a company in Eastern Europe, I was the second guy in charge. And the first guy moved on for a number of different reasons, which I won't go into. And I thought I should get the top spot. And I said, look, I've been here for 2.5 years. I've been building the company. I deserve it. And as many large Fortune, companies, Fortune 500 companies, they have succession plan, right? So they sent this guy in from Denmark who was a sales expert to run the company. And he was a pretty good sales guy. I'll give that to him, but he had zero people skills. I mean, he was a terrible leader. Yeah. And he was, on top of that, he was kind of an insecure leader because he was threatened by strong individuals. And I remember, I was the second guy in charge. I was doing all the operations. I was the CEO, COO of that company. And he said, look, we're having a company meeting, prepare a presentation on operations for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So he goes first, and he's got these, we're in Eastern Europe, and he's got these slides of American football and other stuff, trying to rah-rah, and he's getting like zero feedback. Like people are just staring at it like he's nuts, like they just, the people don't get it, right? Because they can relate to a lot of that stuff. And I go up, and they already know me, and I'm a pretty dynamic speaker, so I talked about shareholder value. And I try to tell them, look, if I give you $1 and I took $1 out of my pocket, I gave it to somebody in the audience, you don't want to give me back the $1. You want to give me back on my investment. So we all owe it to our shareholders and our customers to improve efficiencies, to grow, et cetera. So, and I got a standing ovation. So as I'm walking back to the seat, I passed by this guy, Ken, who was my boss, and you could see his face is like boiling over, right? So I like, this is not going to be good. But is one of those instances where I really showed him up, and it wasn't intentional. It's just, I'm a much better public speaker than he was. He didn't really connect well. He was there, I think, already for 6 months, and nobody liked him. He was just, very introverted guy. I'm a very extroverted guy. And so anyway, he built the case to can me, right? He kind of looked for things, right? So he was one of those guys that rather than embracing somebody strong, yes, to work for him, he was threatened by somebody who worked for him. And I'm sure I had something to do with that because I thought I should have his seat. Mm-hmm. So I got canned, and then, that was the first time I got canned, which was devastating to me. And it took about 2 weeks, where I was just like moping. I couldn't figure out what, I thought my life was over. And then about 2 weeks, the light went on. I said, look, I'm still the same person, right? Regardless of, I still have the same skill sets. I still know the same things. I still have the same energy. So, I came from a marketing background. So I said, okay, well, how do I brand myself? What am I really good at? And I branded myself, and I started to market myself as a brand. And within 3 or 4 months, I had a great job. And then really, if it wasn't for that time, me getting canned and staying with a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 company, I probably could have gone, grown with that company in middle level management because it was a large company. I don't think I ever made it to the C-suite. But the fact that, I got canned and I had to reinvent myself, or actually not reinvent myself, just find myself and brand myself.
Yeah.
And then that's a principle I recommend to everybody. I did it for myself, just do some soul searching and see what you're good at, see what your skill sets are,
Yeah.
and brand yourself accordingly, and just follow that path.
Yeah. No doubt. That's a great story. And shame on that leader for not, instead of being envious and, um, he could have used you in such a powerful way for his own success, but he chose to, okay, I can't have this guy showing me up. He wasn't showing him up. You just did your thing. He just did
That
it
was
for himself.
myself, yeah.
You don't think he would have raised his game, but I love that. What's been your greatest success?
Having two grown kids that are pretty successful themselves.
Yes.
Obviously I can't take all the credit. My wife was a very integral, pillar and bringing those kids up, because the fact is I worked a lot, I traveled a lot. So, it was funny. We were having a family dinner when I just mentioned to you that we were in Hungary, and the reason we went to Hungary was to celebrate my mother's 93rd birthday.
Oh, wow.
So we all
Wow.
went there. I was born in Hungary, and so I have a Hungarian heritage. So we all went back there to celebrate the 90th, including my wife, my kids, my sister, her husband, and her two boys. And we're sitting, the kids, not us, but Nicole was telling me a story that they were sitting around the table, and they were saying, how much pressure is on my two nephews, because both my sister's an MD, and my brother-in-law is a doctor, PhD. And the kids had a lot of pressure on them to succeed, and they just wanted to
Yeah.
live their life.
Yeah.
And they were sharing that story about how much pressure it is that they wanted to follow in their footsteps. And Nicole said, well, actually, I did follow my dad, right? I'm living his life, because I was pretty much a successful executive, and so was she.
Wow.
She kind of ranked through. She's one of the top sales guys for sales women.
Uh,
She's part of she's one of the most successful sales, and she works in the freight industry. She used to work in the beverage industry for companies like Red Bull, Vita Coco, and others. And then she went over to Uber Freight, and then from Uber Freight she went to one of their competitors, and she's one of the top salespeople.
wow.
She just bought an $11.5 million account.
Wow.
So she said, well, I'm actually following in my dad's footsteps.
Wow.
So my other daughter is very different. She's also equally successful. She climbs mountains, and great skier. She does a lot of social media. So and the bottom line is, judge me by that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you didn't hesitate on the answer, because most people, I hate to say this, when I ask them that, they talk about something in business, and you talked about your kids. I love that. And that is a true mark of success. There's no doubt about it. Um, Servant leadership, Tom, you talk about that a lot. Hey, define that for us these days, and what does that really look and feel like?
A lot of people have trouble with it, because they become a servant leader. The first thing you have to realize, it's not about you, right? It's about something much bigger than you. And a
Yeah.
lot of leaders are absolved on themselves. I did it. I have to make the decisions. I have to set the direction. It's always about my plan, my strategy. And the second that you realize it's not about you, but it's something much bigger than you, then you begin to walk the road of a servant leader, right? So really, it's about creating a success, or creating an environment for success, for your employees, for your
Mhm.
customers, etc. So that's, I would say, that's the first step of how to go about it.
Mhm. And so I love that, like creating an environment of success. So, and you say you also added your customers in there. I love that. And so for those emerging leaders that are looking to pick a lane of a leadership style, which I'm not big on leadership styles, because I think that they should change according to your team. But why would I be a servant leader? What's some of my big advantages there? If that's where I'm like, everything I want to do is I want to serve.
Well, because once you realize that it's not about you, it's about, you make other people successful, then you become successful by association,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So that's kind of um, the philosophy, behind it is to say, and as Zig Ziglar said, if you want something, just, and I don't know the exact what I'm terrible about, of course, but it's pretty much, if you give something for everybody to succeed, then you will be successful yourself.
Yes,
And that's not exactly what Zig said, but it was something,
it's right
similar to
there.
that.
Yeah.
But that's really kind of the philosophy behind it. So, I always thought when I was at the top of the food chain, I had the easiest job in the world because all I had to do was make sure that we had a common vision, common values, common culture that everybody lived, and then everybody knew how to contribute to that vision to make it a reality. And then it was just for me to equip them, to make sure that they had the assets, they had the training, they had the support to be successful. And that was my job. So, even early on in my career, I read a book from Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor of New York City, and how every Monday he would sit down with his direct reports and go through everything. And I never, micromanaged my folks when I got up to be, later up in the higher in my career. And all I would do is every Monday we would meet as a team, and we go through last week's accomplishments and this week's challenges. I make sure that we're all ready for it. And that once a month, I would spend a half a day with each one of my direct reports, going through all the tasks that we agreed that they had to do and see how they were doing. And it wasn't, like a report card, like you got a, an F or a C or an A, but it was more like, all right, if you're not accomplishing it, why is that, and how can I help you?
Mhm.
How can I help you accomplish it? Is it money? Is it, and it sometimes wasn't money. It wasn't just like, Tom, can you come with me to see the head buyer of Walmart? Or, Tom, can you come with me to, help me shoot a commercial, or whatever. So a lot of it was just, picking my brain and say, okay, what is the right thing to do? How to go forward with it. So that's really what I think what it boiled down to me, that I really didn't have to do much. I had to kind of just support the guys. And obviously there were other things like, PR and other things to make sure, and industry associations and things that I sat on, which were
Yeah.
important.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you said, what do you need from me is how you kind of ended, every meeting. And that's so important because that puts you out there, right? And okay, is it more funding, whatever it is? What do you need from me? Tom, how has leadership changed over the last several years? Let's say last 5 years. What are some key changes that you've seen when it comes to the successful leader versus the leader that's either mediocre or unsuccessful?
Well, what changed a lot is COVID, and what changed a lot is the work environment over
Hmm.
the last 5 years. So, prior COVID, everybody was in offices, right? I mean, you met in the offices, and you huddled around the coffee machine, or so there was a lot of informal meetings that were happening. And then over COVID, everybody started working out of their house, which was a, kind of a blessing. I had, one guy said, look, I'm traveling 2 hours every day commuting, which is, not useful time. So
Yeah.
working out at home, I get an extra 2 hours to do stuff. So there are some positives, but there's also some negatives, because that is it camaraderie, or
Yes.
how
Camaraderie. Yeah. You got it.
I'm mumbling here. But they kind of disappeared, right?
Yes.
Because,
Yeah.
people were not just bumping into each other. Hey, John, I was just thinking about this problem. I bumped into you. What do you think? So that doesn't happen anymore. So everybody kind of is in isolation. Um, and I think leaders of companies have to recognize that requires a different mindset and a different organization and structure, different, maybe even culture, slightly, updated culture on how you go about that. And the other thing that happened is, I don't know if you know Tim Elmore, but he's one of John Maxwell guys, and
Yes.
he just came out with a book last year, which is called A Different Type of Diversity. And
Yes.
he recognizes that in any given organization, you have baby boomers and Gen Zs and Gen Xs, And I don't even know what the new one after that is. So I'm sure they have a new name for that. But
Zoomers, I think. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so you have four generations of different skill sets and different mindsets in an organization, and how do you get them to work together? Because they view the world very differently. I mean,
Yes.
I remember when there was no such thing as a cell phone. I
Yeah.
remember when there was no such thing as a computer. I mean, I went to college and I had these little punch cards, index cards that I had to key in something into, and then I gave these big pile of cards to somebody, and they read the cards, and then I got a printout of what happened to my computer program. I mean, that's the first computer I saw.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it was the size of my house. The room was the size of my house, and probably didn't do 1/100th of thing that your phone does today, right? And
Right.
then
Exactly.
you have the new generation that grew up on phones.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
so they have so much information available to them that I didn't have when I was a kid, right? So it's like, oh, I don't know the answer. Well, just Google it, right? Or now you got ChatGPT, right? So
Yeah.
so you have all these tools for the young generation that the older generation doesn't have, but that doesn't necessarily say that they have wisdom. It doesn't necessarily say that they have understanding. That says that they have a wealth of information available to them,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
so you just have to recognize that we're dealing with the very different dynamics with the different age groups and the different technologies today, and then you have a workforce of all these different mindsets. Your leadership today has to be very different than your leadership was 20 or 30 years ago.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. Absolutely. Um, what what would you say would be 2 or 3 must-have skills today, Tom? You really touched on it just now. Go a little further. What's a couple of skills that you see the most successful leaders have today and that you emphasize in your teachings and trainings?
Well, look, integrity is very important, right? People value leaders who they can depend on, right?
Now,
So I tell people all the time. So I'll share this with your podcast. If they've heard me somewhere else, they probably heard this 100 times before. But if they haven't, then this is the first time they hear it. Answer 3 questions for yourself. And the first question is, who are you? The second question is, what are you passionate about? And the third question is, what are you good at? So why are those 3 things important? If you aren't sure of who you are, right, and you don't know what you stand for, you can't lead people, because people look at you and say, okay, well, what is the guy about, right? So they need to be able to buy into you. So for example, right, back in the 80s and 90s, when I was working for large corporations, I would have people come in with Harvard MBAs, Stanford MBAs, and basically big Ivy League schools wanting to work for me. Now, in fact, they really didn't want to work for me. They wanted to work for that Fortune 100 company. I just happened to represent the position inside the company where an opportunity came up and they were applying for it. So it wasn't really so much about me. Again, it's not about you. So get up for yourself, right?
yeah.
It was about that brand that they wanted to work for. And then in 2006, I went on my own and I started my own company. And I came from a mindset of hiring really top level talent. So I had these people show up at my door, and number one, they were not top talent, and number two, they're like, who the hell are you and why should I work for you, right? So especially you said some of your listeners are smaller or companies, entrepreneurs and stuff like that, where they don't have a small brand, they don't have a really big brand that's a draw.
Yes.
In the end, people come work for them because they buy into them as a person, right? So once you have a real sense of a grasp of who you are and what you stand for, then you can get people to start following you and buying into you. And if they don't buy into you, they ain't coming. And then the second thing is be passionate about whatever you do. I don't know what you do, but be passionate about it. Because if you're not passionate about it, people are not going to follow you. They say, well, he's not on fire about it, so why should I be?
Why should I be?
And
Absolutely.
And the third one is know what you're good at, because nobody likes incompetence, right? So look, I don't want to be political, but I sometimes joke a little bit, but I compare, not to be party specific, but I compare 2 presidents, right? I compare Bill Clinton, who's a Democrat, which I think was probably the best, the last good president that we had, and Joe Biden, who's also a Democrat, right? So the Bill, everybody knew who he was. Now, maybe he didn't like some of his antics, some of his, you know, on the side stuff, but he was a pretty good leader. Peter bought, people bought into him. He was charismatic, right? He was very passionate about everything he did. I mean, and I remember being in a room with him, and he was like a freaking magnet. I mean, he just lit up the room. He raised the temperature in the room, right? And he was pretty good at, he recognized that he had to govern the country, so he kind of shifted his stance a little bit and became a more moderate. Bought the House and everybody together to get things accomplished. So he was a pretty good president. People followed him. Contrast that with this guy today. Nobody knows what he stands for, right? I mean, the falsities, the lies that come out of his mouth every day is mind-boggling. Right. Everybody falls asleep in a room when he's in there. So he's not passionate about anything. And you read the news, it doesn't matter which news you read. Everybody says the guy's incompetent. He's just, old and doesn't know what he's doing and is not good at his job. So it's the country followed Bill because Bill was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And nobody follows Biden because the guy is just a train wreck. Right?
Yeah. I want to stay on Clinton for 1 second because I used him a lot as an example when he ran against Bob Dole, Senator Dole, who a great leader in his own right, military guy, but the charisma of Clinton versus the charisma of Dole, there was no comparison. Poor Dole. Now in all fairness, he was partially paralyzed, right? So he couldn't really be animated when he was speaking, but he would hold that pen and that would like put people to sleep. Literally. I mean, he's like, and Clinton, I think, also recognized that he may not have. Who knows? Maybe he didn't love Newt Gingrich, right? He was the Speaker of the House at the time. But he recognized, I got to work with this guy. And it's just the opposite of the story you told at the beginning, how, you're that leader that was fuming. In his mind, he should have said, this Tom guy, I'm not crazy about him, but oh my gosh, I need him on my side. And both of them realize that, and you're exactly right. I really, man, that's a great example. You're exactly right. If you're not passionate these days. So leaders, those 3 things that Tom just listed out, that's worth the price of admission today. That is your takeaway today, big takeaway. Thank you so much for that. I got one last quick question, and then I want to leave time for how people can contact you and get your book. Middle leaders, hopefully they do aspire to get to the C-suite, right? Best path there is what? What are some key things that you did in the past that still works, or what are some new things that leaders can do so that they can get to the place that they might aspire to get?
Well, look, again, answer those 3 questions. Have clarity on that, because as people look at you, that will determine their confidence in you, right? So don't be a lone wolf, right? Build your circle of influence. There's a thing that's called circle of influence, and there's a thing called circle of reaction. A lot of times we spend our time in circle of reaction, reacting to other people's issues, problems, etc., and we waste a lot of time there. So focus on your circle of influence and grow that circle of influence. Right? So grow that circle of influence by getting in front of or getting on project teams that will give you visibility. Right? Grow your circle of influence by being productive and showing results, right? Again, grow your influence by just getting visible, so people say, hey, John is doing a pretty good job, right? And also be ready for the opportunity. So I'll show you, I'll share you one example that I had in the early, I would say mid to late 80s. It was late 80s. I was working for a guy, great, he's one of those guys that I really truly respected, and we remain friends, and is just a super guy. And he and I had an agreement as part of my career development to make sure I'm on project teams, I make sure I get exposure and do at least present to some of the senior executive VPs in this Fortune 100, right?
Mhm.
So over a period of 2 years, we put a plan together, which consisted of everything like, I had to work with a speech coach because I talk so fast, nobody could understand me. How to present better. So, all those things were part of that. But I did get in front of 4 or 5 of the executive VPs of this company presenting as part of the project, and I did a pretty good job. So when it came for Eastern Europe, and Eastern European curtain came down in about 1991. So all the Fortune 100s looked in their portfolios to see who are the local language, who are the local linguistic speakers. And oddly enough, out of 20,000 employees, I think 4 or 5 spoke Hungarian. It's a very unique language.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was a plus for me, right?
Yeah.
But that wasn't the only thing that sealed the deal, because what really sealed the deal was everybody, not everybody, but at least 4 of the executive VPs in the company said, "Oh, Tom speaks Hungarian. Let's send Tom," right? Because
Yeah.
he knew me.
Wow.
I got in front of
Wow.
him.
Yeah.
So the key is to make sure that when opportunity arises, you're ready to go through that door.
Yeah.
If that 1991 Eastern European curtains came down, but nobody knew my name, and the only thing I had going for it was I'm being Hungarian, I'm not on this podcast talking to you, because I don't have the 25-year, 30-year international executive career. I don't get to C-suite. I don't get to write this book, right? And I'm not on your podcast. So as things happen in your life, opportunities, doors will open, but you have to be ready to walk through them. Because if you start preparing to walk through that door, when that door opens, it'll shut before you're ready.
Yeah.
Right. No. So just look at those doors, how they open. Make sure you're preparing yourself. Make sure your circle of influence is growing as your career is growing. Right. When I got to my CEO position, I didn't like the team. I thought the team wasn't really that good. I kept some of the guys, but I knew I had to bring in new blood, and all I had to do was make a bunch of calls to old friends that I worked along for many years in the industry. And because of our personal relationship, and because they bought into my character, who I was, they had absolutely no problem. So yeah, absolutely, Tom, I'll come work for you.
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
So that's what I mean by your circle of influence. So all of a sudden that particular door opened for me to be a CEO, and I was ready. I was ready to walk through it, and I could bring talent over. So I didn't start, going to a headhunter and say, okay, how can I find somebody to start working for me? Right?
Yeah.
So I was ready for it.
Just made phone calls. That's awesome. That's some fantastic advice. And I love it. At the beginning, you said, not to be a lone wolf. And that's such great advice in itself, because if you're a lone wolf, you're not going to have that circle of influence. You're not going to have people you can call on. You're not going to have an advocate like you had that pushed for you, that set you up for success. But you also, like you said, you have to walk through that door yourself. You've got to, prepare yourself as well. Tom, this has been amazing. What an amazing leader you are, and what great advice you gave. So I want to give you now time. Talk about how folks can contact you and get your book.
Well, getting the book is easy. That's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I'm sure many other online retailers. It's called C-Suite and Beyond, the 4 Keys to Leadership Success. Or and you pronounce my name correctly, which is very few people do. So congratulations. But I have a very unique last name. If you Google my last name, you got my sister, my couple of my daughters, right? Kereszti, Kereszti. It's a very unique last name.
Yes.
So if you just put that into Amazon, I'll pop up. So you'll see my book right away. If you go to LinkedIn, which is probably my biggest social media, I mean, my kids are on TikTok and Instagram. I'm not so much. So I'm pretty much on LinkedIn. That's the best way to find me. Just type in my last name, you'll find me. And just reach out if you have a question or whatever. Just either LinkedIn or my website. Just drop me a note. Say you want to talk to me about something. I'm happy to give you 15 minutes of my time.
Awesome. Tom, thank you for being so generous with your time today. Glad you're on the mend and doing better. And I'm so glad we got to connect. And leaders, this is what self-development is all about. Turn this on while you're driving, whatever. and you heard someone who has done it, that has been successful, that's still doing it today, but the advice he gave was priceless. So Tom, thank you again.
Kenny, thank you so much, and I hope if it's just one nugget for your audience,
yep,
then my day was well spent. Thank you so much for having me.
No doubt. There's no doubt. Well, this has been Kenny and Tom. This has been the Leading from the Middle podcast. We'll talk to you real soon.